Adams. I'm the Executive Director of the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, or ANHD. And I'm excited to welcome you to our conference event focused on building merchant power. So later today, Later today, we will hear a panel discussion focusing on patterns of small business displacement and the power of merchant organizing. But before we even get started with that, right, it makes sense. We're talking about small businesses. We're talking about how our small businesses have been core to our lives and to our communities all the time, but especially as we have been in very different times, given the pandemic and given everything that has been happening in the past 3 years. So we have Marte Dance Company. It's an artistic organization that exposes the history and the art of indigenous artisans of Mexican culture through dance. The goal is to promote Mexican culture, heritage, and bring history to life. The company offers educational programs to New York City communities. They believe in an approach to culture and the arts that should be holistic, and that each of their programs reconnects and supports the indigenous communities that we leave in Mexico. So their mission is to really create a union between dance, research, indigenous art, in order to promote Mexican heritage, to bring history to life, and to produce educational programs for communities. They want to really expand cultural awareness and appreciation that will nurture diversity and inclusivity. So I want to get everybody set and get everybody comfortable. So first and foremost, I apparently have been told that drinks have started serving, so you don't have to wait until 4 o'clock if you're feeling like it's that kind of day. You know, no judgment, do what you need to do. But get kind of comfortable and settled in your seats. We're going to have 2 dance performances. First one will be about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A with Martha, the artistic director of the dance company, and Catherine Domenech, the social impact group, the head of the social impact group, New York Region, Wells Fargo Bank, where we'll learn more about how the dance company's experiences and performing art as a performing arts organization really aligns with and their experiences with being a small business in the Bronx, right? So we want to hear from a business owner and hear what their experiences are and what they've gone through and what they see and what they confront every single day. And then we'll come back, we'll have one more dance performance, we'll get resettled, we'll have a little get some energy, and then we'll go into the panel conversation. So I want to get everybody revved up because we get to see folks perform for us, and we want to be able to give them the energy that they're going to be bringing to us. And we know there's going to be folks kind of sprinkling in as we go, so also expect some folks to be moving around you and getting settled into their seats as this performance is going, but we want to give them a warm welcome. So I would like to invite Marte to the stage, so everybody enjoy.
Ay, qué All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you. And thank you for that energizing first performance. And what a great reminder of how much we need arts organizations in our communities. Without further ado, I'd like to bring up Catherine and Martha, who will talk a little bit about what it's like to own a small business right now. They are on, yeah.
Hello. Okay, is everybody excited? That was a lot of fun. I can certainly not do that with my feet, and I cannot balance anything on my head. So, so I'm glad I'm doing this part and not that part. Okay, so I'm Catherine Domenech with Wells Fargo. We're really happy to be a sponsor and congratulate ANHD for their conference series this year. And I am happy to, what's that? Okay, we'll let the train go by.
But it wasn't me.
Okay, so we shall improvise. Okay, Martha, it's nice to meet you. So tell us about yourself and why you started the dance company.
Hello? Oh, yeah. Well, so I came from a family of dancers and musicians back in Mexico in the state of Puebla. And since I was little, I was always in contact with that. So growing up, I started joining dancing because that's what I love. And then I moved to New York like 22 years ago, and I saw the necessity of bringing something to the community, especially those kids that they were born here and they lost their identity. So then I started joining a different company and start my journey exactly like a year after I came here. And then a few years after, then Masarte was born because I have some other ideas. And in 2012, I formed Masarte. And in 2014, became a nonprofit organization.
That's wonderful. Why is dance and arts and culture important to the Bronx?
Oh, it's super important, and not just to the Bronx, to everybody. And we saw it now in the pandemic. Right after we came back from the pandemic, we saw that then that's what makes us alive, you know, arts. Arts is what we need, besides other things, of course, but then arts because that brings us together. Music, dance, painting, sculpture, anything that you do have to do with the arts is very, very important. So I saw that, and then especially with the kids, I wanted the kids to be able to have that, and then I tried to bring some free classes to the kids, especially those that they really needed, that they are afraid maybe to go to other places because either it's too expensive or because I don't know how. So then to open the doors to everybody, not just Mexican community, but then to anybody that needs.
Yeah, so you talked about the pandemic. How did that affect your work? And you're talking about students and children, and everybody was at home. Talk to us about how the pandemic affected your business.
Well, yeah, I was giving classes at the Bronx Music Heritage Center, free classes for kids. And then the pandemic happened, so then I started thinking, what should I do? And then I have another class in Staten Island. And so then I started working on Zoom, my first time, and then I call everybody and I say, you know what, we're gonna start the classes again via Zoom. And I am happy that I did that because in so many cases, there's so many families were leaving the kids alone in their houses because they mostly Mexican families, they had to go and still working because those was the ones that were still working, and the kids were alone at home. And I was the only thing that I keep them entertained for an hour every week. Then I said, let's do 2 classes, then every week 2 classes. And that was in the kids' part. But then the company, it was so complicated. So we decided to go back into business in October the same year, and we went to parks. We adopt parks to go and explore because we cannot be here. We have to do something. I know it's very important and we need to be careful, but then we need to do something. And then we lost a lot of opportunities to perform and, of course, to get some income to the company. And also because the company provides also some income to people that participate with us because they get some money from the performances. So it was very hard for everybody, but then we kept going, and then we did like pop-up performances outside small businesses. We went to one each borough, not just the Bronx. We picked a restaurant in the Bronx, a store in Manhattan, a farmer's market in Brooklyn, and I don't remember the others, but then we went there, and then we just danced on the street for no money just because we want to make people see that we need this, and then the small business that need help, and that was our way to work without receiving anything. But then, you know, that's what we did through the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I think arts and culture kept a lot of us going at a very difficult time. And so the fact that you would perform for free and that it is all about the passion of the work and reaching people, we all applaud you and thank you for doing that. Yeah.
Thank you.
So tell us about any resources that you needed to get back on your feet. What any resources that you want to share with us, or anything that maybe you didn't receive that you could have used?
Yeah, you know, it's hard because I know there's maybe many places that were giving help or grants, and sometimes I was not aware of them. Thank God there's some these dance organizations like Dance NYC that they reach out to me and they say, hey, hello, there's this going on. Why don't you apply? Because the way your organization is too small and you need this. So go ahead and apply. And then apply through them, and then I got some help. Of course, was not enough because we're depending on also many performances that we do through the year, and they were not there. So we were always and still looking for opportunities to perform because we love to perform, but then also we get something back so that we can, get some money out of that. And what we really need also is like spaces to for the classes, because the Bronx doesn't have too many spaces for dance, and those out there, they are not for the type of dance we do. Because see, dancing on this floor is not the best, even though we do it and we love it, anywhere. But then to practice, we need a specific type of floor. Otherwise, we're going to start having problems with our knees, and we don't want that. I had to be careful with my community. So then, since there's no places, then that's something that we need. And then that's been forever. And not only in the Bronx, I feel the Bronx is lacking places. But then Manhattan has some, but then sometimes they don't allow you, even when they have the best floors and the best opportunities. So I guess that's the main thing, spaces for what we do.
Or we need to get you a traveling stage, right?
Very good idea. Yeah.
Okay, so today's event is focused on small business displacement and merchant organizing. So can you tell us what happens to arts and cultures as neighborhoods get gentrified?
Well, this is very difficult because, we've been seeing that through the years, right? So I'm kind of new in the Bronx, even if I've been here for 22 years. But then my husband is from the Bronx, and he is telling me stories about how people was displaced. He's from Puerto Rican family, so then he saw how things been changing, and then it's really affects everybody because the first people to be displaced is us, right, the minorities, and then what I do, I depend on them because that's what I do. I try to offer things for them, and then they move in. So what are gonna do? That's the first thing. No, there's no community for me anymore. And then about the space, thank God, I just rent the space. I don't own the space. So then I didn't affect directly and on a space, but I can see that many organizations that I know, that they have to move or look for different spaces, or they go space to space because there's no other option. And then you have to start over, right? You start building your community, and then suddenly it's time for you to move, and then you lost all those years of work, and then you have to start over. So it's really hard.
Yeah, I can imagine. So how do the performing arts fit into the small business ecosystem as a whole?
It was kind of funny when I was invited to this, because I see, for example, now with the pandemic, the help to the small businesses, and then I say, I am a small business. Can I go and ask for money too? And so I didn't know that my business is considered part of those small businesses. So I think maybe we need to be, maybe myself go and look for information, but maybe that information also is not out loud and everywhere, so I was not able to see it. Or maybe they never mentioned arts. I see the list of businesses that were helping, and there is always like, nail salons, small restaurants, the deli, cleaners, maybe, I don't know, other type of, but I never see dance organizations or art organizations. So I think we need to share more information and then make it everything out loud and then bigger, so then we all can see. Or maybe there's somebody there that can say, go here, look for this, because there's help, But I don't know, maybe you can tell me later on how we can do that,
That's a good feedback and takeaway, and I think helps us launch into some of our panel discussions. But before we do that, we are going to have another performance, which we're really excited about. And it was very nice to meet you. Thank you so
Nice to
much.
meet you too. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here.
Todos me dicen el negro llorona, negro pero cariñoso. Todos me dicen el negro llorona, negro pero cariñoso. Yo soy como el chile verde, llorona, picante pero sabroso. Yo soy como el chile verde, llorona, picante pero sabroso. Ay de mí, llorona, llorona, llorona de azul celeste. Ay de mí, llorona, llorona, llorona de azul celeste. Y aunque la vida me cueste, llorona, no dejaré de quererte. Aunque la vida me cueste, llorona, no dejaré de quererte. Salía este templo un día, llorona, cuando
welcome everyone to the fourth and final day of ANHD's annual 11th Annual Community Development Conference. So for those who this is your first one, welcome, and for those who this is your fourth one, thank you for hanging with us consistently throughout these. I'm Barika Williams. I'm the Executive Director of the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, or ANHD. Hi, nice to meet you. So this is the fourth and final day of what is our reimagined conference. And you know, after the pandemic, we really took some time. I have gotten to chat with some folks about it to really think about what is our conference format and what conference format makes sense for us as ANHD, given who we are, who our members are, what our work is about, and what our values are. So this new approach of our conference is really aligned with our goal of uplifting our members and communities and having those conversations in the places where they're happening. So today we are incredibly happy to be at the Bronx Brewery, right? I'm gonna, where is he? I'm looking at him. I'm gonna do that again because when we did this in the Brooklyn showed up. So we are in the Bronx. All right, okay. I was like, because Bronx tends to be a little rowdy on the shout outs. We know from previous experience, but it's good. So we had, if you weren't here before, we had an amazing performance from the Mazarte Dance Company as part of the event beforehand. If you haven't seen them, don't know them, look them up. If you're looking for something to do for an event, for your company, for your business, for your community, we encourage you to think about using them. And later on, we're going to have empanadas from Empanology, and there will be drinks. So this is really a time for us to like celebrate and talk about everything that we've learned and seen over the past 3 conferences. And we will also have music from Bronx-based DJ Pusha. So we're going to close this out with some good times. I'll talk about this a little at the end, but we've had an amazing set of vendors and performers as a core part of our conference's mission. So part of what we really wanted to do with our conference resources and dollars and with the funds that we get from our sponsors is to think about how we, ANHD, are using that to invest back in our communities and our neighborhoods. So we were at an arts and cultural institution for our first event in Astoria, Queens. We were at an ANHD members space for our second event in Brooklyn. We were at a faith-based space that is open to its community in Manhattan. And here we are at a small business in the Bronx, right? So I am incredibly proud to say that we are able to report that 85% of our conference budget has been paid out to MWBEs and nonprofits, right? And so this matters to us, right? Like these are the groups that our groups are working with, that we're working with on campaigns, on policy issues. So for us to be able to say what we're doing with our resources is supporting them is really incredible, and is how. Ooh. Time out. 2-minute pause. There we go. But it's a good reminder of like it just takes a little bit of intentionality and a little bit of extra work to make your values show up in how you are moving forward and doing and spending your money and resources. I want to highlight for folks, there are some poster boards around that have some very cool maps on them that really are capturing some of the things that are in a recent ANHD small business report around storefront vacancies in small businesses. And where are they? Gina, Lucy, Karen, and Sarah, where are they? If everybody that full group can raise their hands, these are the authors of this awesome report. Some of the incredible findings are really understanding how some of New York City's largest ethnic enclaves and gentrifying council districts have some of the highest vacancy rates in the city when it comes to the small businesses, and which can lead to a scarcity of the culturally relevant goods and services, like the business that we just saw perform, and really create some destabilization in the neighborhood. So for storefront rents increased 71% from 2019 to 2020 in neighborhoods that were majority people of color versus only 42% in neighborhoods that weren't, right? So also let's keep in mind that as we're having this conversation, part of what's going to be coming up is like there's a difference in what storefront vacancies and changes in rents look like depending on what your neighborhood is. I also want to thank Goldman Sachs. I'm not sure if I see the folks here quite yet, but they have been huge supporters of our small business work and support the small business report being written and all the research that goes into it. So I really just want to also say thank you to them for that support and resources. I want to, I see Calvin was there, but there's Calvin. So Calvin is with New York City's Small Business Services with SBS. And to highlight, ANHD is doing a first of its kind program with SBS on improving and getting support for merchant organizing. So BCDI sitting right here, you're going to hear from Michael as the facilitator of the, as the moderator of the panel. But what we're doing is we're working with our ANHD groups to provide them with TA and to provide them with support so that they are able to support their small businesses in their neighborhoods, not just in terms of like, here's your direct resource or sign up for this program or access this grant, but also to say like, what do you need, right? Thinking about what we heard from Martha and Mazarte, like what do you need as a small business? How can we help you communicate your voice? How can we connect you to other businesses? What are your space issues? Do you need a new dance floor, right? These are things that we need to understand and really hear from businesses. So over the next 4 days, over the 4 days of conference, we've covered topics like land use justice, creating sustainability for small homeowners and their tenants, challenging modern day redlining, and today we're talking about small business displacement. So we've got a great panel and excited, and we all know and we often talk about, ANHD especially often talks about residential tenants in New York City and New York State. But commercial tenants and specifically small businesses, and especially BIPOC and immigrant small businesses, have the potential and the opportunity to organize and gain some of the needed protections, opportunities, resources that the residential space has too, right? And we understand and we hear this when we're talking to business owners, where they're like, well, yeah, I'm going through this in my home, but I actually have a very similar challenge in the business that I own, right? And recognizing that their opportunity to plug in, to be a part of a community, to access certain resources on the side of being a residential tenant isn't necessarily mirrored when it comes to their small business space. So we're going to talk about and hear from the panel to bring together practitioners working to understand what the patterns of small business displacement, and from organizers and merchant leaders doing the work to try to figure this out. So before we dive into our panel, first I want to make sure to thank our various sponsors. So our movement leader sponsor, Citi, our community convener sponsor, Goldman Sachs, our neighborhood defender sponsor, Wells Fargo, we heard from Catherine earlier, and our lead law sponsor, Goldstein Hall. I want to thank all of them. I want to thank Bronx Brewery for so generously hosting us today, and for being a small business that invites these conversations into their space. I also want to thank, we haven't done this yet, I want to thank Blackheart, our AV team, for the conference, who is also a worker cooperative AV company. So even more so putting our values forward. And Don J. Gilmore, our conference photographer, who is always running around, for their incredible support throughout the series. So to kick us off, we like to right? And this is why I was like, I'm behind this thing. Okay, so we have all gone through some tough 2.5 years in your neighborhoods. And everybody had a time where probably you were like hunkered down in a place, right? And maybe you lived in somewhere between 5 to 15 or so blocks, depending on what's going on. So I'm gonna ask for folks to shout out a small business, wherever you are, you can say where it is, that helped you get through pandemic times. Maybe still helping you get through pandemic times. Is that everyone ready? Prepared? Thinking about it? Okay? All right. Who's got one? See, this is always the point. I just said, are you prepared? You guys nodded. You said yes. And then I was like, where are we? And everyone's like, quiet. What is it? La Mirada. What's La Mirada? Mexican food, worker-owned, community-rooted. I know Michael, so I'm assuming this is in the Bronx. Bronx, see, there we go. This is in the Bronx. All right. Okay, so we got some Mexican food. What else do we have? Good Hope. Jamaican restaurant in Brooklyn. Okay. What else? Hungry Bird. South Bronx Indian food. All right. This is like, I'm queuing up my list of places that I'm going to go, by the way. So if you're not doing that, that's. What else? Who's else got one? Say that again. Ralph's Bodega on Lafayette. Okay. Anything? Bioclassic. Oh, all Latino cleaning worker-owned cooperative. Okay. See, also Bronx. See, and let's remember, it's not just your restaurants. One of mine is Happy Cleaners. Ms. Linda made sure that I still had a way to wash my clothes in the middle of the pandemic because I don't live in a place that has a washer or dryer in it. And I was like, if you guys aren't here on the flip side, I don't know what I'm going to do. So, couple more. Oh, nice. AJO Lumber, a family-owned lumber store in Manhattan, hardware store in Manhattan. And did you say your family owns it? Ah, very cool. Very cool. Very nice. It's like, now I will be at this hardware store. All right, hardware stores, restaurants, cleaning, laundry, anything else? Yeah. There we go. I was like, nobody's going to say this? This is, which one? You got to have a specific one? Okay. 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 So the liquor store on Merrick Boulevard in Queens, right? They're right, you know, the cross streets. These are things that like got us through, right? So I think it's important to remember as we're having this conversation that like it's not just a like policy conversation and it's not just a resources conversation. For me, I don't know about y'all, but like all of a sudden my world shrunk to this very small place in the pandemic. And I saw these small business owners more often than I was seeing almost anybody else. I went from seeing the team on Zoom, family on FaceTime, and the small businesses actually in person, right? And as we as a city are thinking about recovery and what that looks like, we're starting to have a very different conversation about what is the central hubs of what the city looks like. Because we've, for a long time, been designed as Midtown and Manhattan, really Manhattan business-centric. But for the past 2 some odd years, many of us have been living our lives centered around these various different neighborhoods when we've worked from home. So it's making us think about our small businesses differently. It's making the city think about its small businesses differently. And it's a moment and an opportunity to really have a different conversation. All right, so now you're thinking about a business in your head. You've got somewhere. I didn't say Ode to Babel. I didn't say, like, I have a whole list, right? All right, so I am going to bring up our fantastic group of panelists. Executive Director of Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative, BCDI, Michael Partis, who's going to moderate the conversation. Lead organizer for the Street Vendor Project, Jennifer Salgado. Associate Professor of Urban Studies and Planning and Urban Studies and Planning program at the University of Maryland School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation, and also the Director of Community Development at the National Center for Smart Growth. And she's also the Director of the Small Business Anti-Displacement Network, so a lot of different roles. Willow Lung-Amam, and the Senior Vice President of the Division of Small Business and Technology Capital Access for Empire State Development. Ray, say your last name for me. Ray Salaberrios. I was like, let me not mess this up. And I just want to note for folks too, different folks, SBS Commissioner Kevin Hill really wanted to be here but wasn't able to. I know he's traveling. He had something this morning but then had to travel. And likewise, Empire State Development President and CEO Hope Knight, who is coming to ESD from being an ED of one of ANHD's member organizations, Greater Jamaica, had to be in Buffalo, but originally was going to be here to give us opening remarks. So I just want to lift up that both of them wish they could be here, but want to be and continue being a part of this conversation. So why don't we have the panelists come on up and come on stage, and we'll get started with a good conversation.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Partis, the Executive Director at BCDI, the Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative. And today's panel is on small business displacement and the power of merchant organizing. And for us, part of that reflects that often when we think about organizing, particularly around rent, we think of renters, we think of living. But what we see in our local Bronx communities and in our economic ecosystem, what we see is that our small business owners, and in particular those minority-owned businesses, right, that they face a different type of pressure, that they face a different type of set of worries. And part of the effect of those businesses being either displaced or forced out, one, it requires us to learn. There's a lot of learning from tenant organizing that is really important in that BCDI, our close relationship with those tenants, organizers, and some of those are ANHD members as well, right? Our close relationship with those tenant organizers, and also with folks that manage and own property at the nonprofit level. Learning of what they do to preserve, learning what they do to fight back and fight forward, as you see surrounding us, is really important. What are those analysis? What is the analysis that's needed? Part of what that analysis shows is partly loss. Some of the things that we've recognized in our work in merchant organizing is around the cultural loss, the cultural capital that's lost when these businesses are displaced. One of the examples up in the Northwest Bronx is many of the restaurants that were small businesses. When those restaurants closed, not only did you lose food services or hospitality, but you lost a convening space where seniors can go in the middle of the day to talk, to have some place to be, to feel safe and feel secure. You lost the kind of learning and training that happens for the staff that has to recognize those flexible spaces and still be customer facing, but also still have to uphold commerce. One of the other things that we learned is that there are very technical kind of concerns that often don't match where systems are trying to help. So concerns from cash flow, concerns around air ventilation, right? One of the primary things for folks that couldn't afford to work from home, that had to still be on the front line. What they learned is that air ventilation is a very, very important thing. And what does it take to not only have loans and to have capital to do that kind of stay open, to worry about cash flow, but also to do the upgrades that are needed, the infrastructure upgrades that are needed, and that those are needed even beyond COVID, right? In the time of COVID, of course, air ventilation and staying alive and staying open was important, but we continue to need that health kind of disparity to be recognized. So what is the capital it takes to have that infrastructure that's needed? How do we deal with the cultural capital that's lost? And then how do we learn from the organizing that already exists, and how do we build on top of that? When we work with our small businesses, that we're not worried about their growth, we're not worried so much about how they're going to evaluate on the market, but we're really worried about the fabric of our community, the people who we employ, the people who we depend on, the people who we know, and the people that have the competence and experience to be able to provide best-in-class technical service and best-in-quality business. So this is some of the things that we've learned. And these are some of the things that are important to recognize when you walk through our Bronx community. And there is additional knowledge that we would love to share on this panel as we begin to our discussion around displacement and ways of preventing that. And so, I want to open us up to a set of questions from this great panel. And I think the first question is going to be around gentrification. And when we think of gentrification, you know, as we said, we think of housing, often is the case, but these small businesses are also facing those threats. And in a gentrifying neighborhood, the question, in a gentrifying neighborhood, what is the relationship between small business displacement and residential displacement? What is the relationship? How do those things correlate or intersect? And perhaps Willow, may I ask you to open us up?
Well, first of all, thank you, Michael, and thank you to ANHD for having me here. I'm coming all the way from DC this morning, just getting here, and thank you. It was quite a feat to get here, actually. I haven't been doing much traveling during COVID, so I'm adjusting a little bit. But also, I really wanted to be here because this also represents an opportunity for us to be in place with one of our partner organizations who is doing the great work on the ground. The Small Business Anti-Displacement Network came together to support organizations like ANHD and other organizations that they support that are doing this kind of work and are looking for resources, networks, knowledge about small business anti-displacement and what we can do about it. And we know that residential displacement is an issue. We know that there are activists working on the ground all the time to push new tenant protections for residential tenants, and we know how important that is. But there has not been that kind of activism around commercial tenants, and there has not been that kind of knowledge networks and knowledge sharing and capacity building in this space in order to really push new kind of protections for commercial tenants, and also push commercial tenants towards commercial ownership and wealth building and other forms of ways of sort of thinking about the potential of small businesses to grow. And so the question of how does residential and commercial displacement relate to one another, I think they're intimately tied to one another. If a resident leaves a neighborhood, it makes a business more vulnerable. If a business leaves a neighborhood, it makes a resident more vulnerable to leave, because displacement is about capital movement, it's about public policy movement, it's about people movement, right? It's about the movement of a flush of capital into a neighborhood and flush of development. It's about the moves of public policy that actually promote certain kinds of businesses to move into a neighborhood, certain kinds of residents to move into a neighborhood, and it's about the people who follow these movements of capital and public policy. And when you have some of those people move, it affects all the other things, right? It affects the economics, it affects the public policy. And ultimately, those businesses, those established residents that were there in the neighborhood support the small businesses. We were just naming all the small businesses that we support in our neighborhood, and we support them because we know them, and we support them because they provide the goods and services, they contribute to the cultural economy and to the identity of our neighborhoods. We support them because we know them personally. And when they leave and a Walmart comes in or a Walgreens comes in or a chain business comes in, it's not producing dollars back into the neighborhood. It's making the neighborhood more vulnerable. And likewise, the business leaves. And residents all of a sudden don't feel as tied to that neighborhood. There's nothing making that neighborhood so distinct anymore. And so residents then don't feel that sort of sense of attachment. If every neighborhood is the same, and small businesses help to define the culture and the character of our neighborhoods, if we don't have that sense of identity in our neighborhoods, we're less attached to it. And then you see residential displacement become an issue as well. So I think all these things are tied together, and it's important to understand that supporting one supports both.
And I think that makes a segue, maybe want to ask Jennifer, maybe if you could expand a little bit on street vendors and street vendors' experience with gentrification, and what do we need to know, and what's some relationships there we should pay attention to?
Right, so I think something that, Willow said earlier was that when the Walmart comes in, those dollars are no longer going to the neighborhood. And similarly, like the employees are no longer from the neighborhood. You then begin to get a different set of people, even managers, who want to uphold a certain aesthetic in the neighborhood to make sure that that business looks good for a certain kind of people. And therefore, then enforcement begins to increase for street vendors. The cops get called on them, enforcement overall gets called on them, and then they have to leave where they've been vending for years. I think that's something that people don't realize, and that bids try to put out there, is that mom and pop shops don't get along with street vendors. When they do, they actually hold a very strong relationship with one another. But when that mom and pop shop leaves and a Target comes in, like we're seeing in Fordham, enforcement increases and that vendor goes away. And then that vendor is no longer able to pay rent because they have no business income, and then they're forced to leave to another state, which we're seeing. People are leaving to New Jersey, people are leaving to Pennsylvania, and yeah.
Thank you, Jennifer. Ray, maybe, you know, as a South Bronx guy, right? As a South Bronx guy and someone as a professional in capital and how capital moves, maybe talk a little bit here around some considerations on gentrification, displacement, and how this impacts small businesses.
Sure. First I gotta say I'm very excited to be here. I mean, I grew up on 134th Street between Willow and Bruckner Boulevard. My 5 sisters and my mother and I, we lived here in this neighborhood. And we talk about gentrification. If you think about this neighborhood, there's no stores around here. There's not a supermarket here, there's not a dry cleaner, so every place we had to go to, we walked across Bruckner. So that was stuck in my mind. That I lived in a neighborhood where there were no services for us. All right, but we had a tight-knit community. It's a big Portuguese community there. I'm not sure if they're still there. When I grew up here, it was full of immigrants from Portugal. We were the only Puerto Rican family in that neighborhood. Think about that in the South Bronx. But as far as the question of gentrification and small business are concerned, what I do for the state is my job is to help small businesses in any way possible. And what I do, what my team does, let me just stop there. What my team does is provide capital. And the way we provide capital is by saying yes. So we don't use the metrics, and I know there's some banks here, so maybe I shouldn't say it this way. We use different metrics, right? So the idea for us is to help these businesses grow. So Willow brought out an important point. When you gentrify a community, normally what happens is you bring in a different subset of a population of inhabitants, right? So luckily back here, this hasn't been gentrified just yet, but across Bruckner Boulevard, you see what's going on in Bruckner Boulevard. So what we do is try to show the small businesses that's an opportunity for you. It's an opportunity to grow your business. So we provide the capital they need, the technical assistance, which is so important. I mean, technical assistance is key. So I will say that this past year, and I'll be quick, this past year we've given out, my team and I have given out $700 million in grants, right? And 95% of those grants went to micro businesses that were owned by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals, right? So for us, it was, what do you need a grant for? I need to buy ventilation equipment. Oh, great. Here's a check. Well, actually not a check. Here's a deposit to your account. And then you find out how many folks don't have bank accounts. So we need to get them into the financial services industry, right? So there's so many challenges that we face, but the critical thing for us is making sure that the street vendors who have their licenses, who may need a $5,000 loan, that they have access to that $5,000, that they don't have to be displaced, that we champion and tell the communities, these folks are here providing businesses and providing services that if they were not here, those services and businesses would not be here. So for me, the key component of this is capital. It is providing capital, providing low-cost capital, and not making people jump through hoops to get money, right? Because the most difficult thing going to a financial services industry is going through the application process. So I'm Puerto Rican, I speak Spanish, but many Hispanics don't speak English, small businesses, but they still need help. So as we continue on, I guess I'm just going to focus on how to help small businesses, right? That's what I'm here for. Okay, great.
You could just throw some money.
Yeah. I wish.
I heard you promised to take us on a walking tour, and that you was just going to throw.
Right.
They say behavioral, so maybe on that point around the technical aspect, so adequate resourcing from government. Maybe Jennifer, any thoughts around from the small business perspective? So we know government can help with capital. We heard a bit about technical assistance. Anything really particular in those two that you want to lift up? And just generally, what are some of the needs and some of the things that we've seen?
Yeah, no, to build on Ray's point about language justice, we really need to make sure that the institutions that are giving out these grants are also ensuring that the information gets across in the small business owner's language. Right now in the South Bronx, there is a huge population of indigenous speakers. And while we know that it's impossible to get an interpreter for some of these folks who speak their language, it's still important that you do the effort in ensuring that at least it's in Spanish, and that it is also in language that's accessible to everyone. And I can't stress that enough, because a lot of the times street vendors come to us even though an application process is in Spanish, and they're like, I still don't understand this because it's a whole bunch of jargon that no one understands. And so we have to have our lawyer come and support. So I think it's simplifying language. And it's a very technical thing that we don't think about, but it's super important in ensuring that a small business can access these resources. It's a great thing about the Bronx.
Transit-orientated development has its challenges and benefits, huh? Maybe, Willow, would you mind talking a little bit to this question, so I'll say it again. From the small business perspective, government, how can they support? We heard about capital, technical assistance. We raised this piece around just language and making it accessible, both being linguistically aligned and also simple. Are there any other kind of lessons or best practices that we want to lift up here?
Sure. Well, first of all, as a starting point, I would say that, I started by defining gentrification as the movement of people, capital, and public policy, right? And so that public policy piece is really important because government is part of the problem, and therefore they have to be part of the solution, right? They oftentimes create tax breaks for these large companies to come in and provide incentives. They oftentimes change zoning to upzone areas so that developers who own the land are all of a sudden making a huge profit on land through nothing that they did, but because of changes in the underlying land uses. So if government is part of the problem, they have to be part of the solution. So yes, capital access is huge, particularly for BIPOC and immigrant-owned businesses who have been historically denied access to capital, have been in neighborhoods that have been commercially and residentially redlined, have been in neighborhoods for decades and supporting these neighborhoods for decades that are underinvested, neglected, have experienced vast capital and people flight out of them. These are the neighborhoods that are supporting these neighborhoods. And then when the capital shifts and public policy shifts to make these neighborhoods valuable, they're the first people that are on the front lines of struggling against the increases in rent and increases in predatory practices against tenants that are trying to force them out. So government can, yes, provide access to capital, yes, provide access to technical assistance, yes, provide language assistance to make that technical assistance and existing grants and programs more accessible, but they can also use their power of taxation and zoning to actually prioritize small businesses, and particularly those BIPOC and immigrant-owned small businesses that have kept these neighborhoods afloat. They can create legacy business programs. They can use their powers of zoning to really prioritize neighborhood businesses. They can help to make commercial businesses more commercially affordable. They can put commercial tenant protections in place that hold landlords accountable for being good and responsible landlords. They can use their powers of zoning to create small spaces that are the spaces where more likely small businesses will locate and find affordable. So there's all kinds of ways in which they can support. They can create new funding sources to make the availability of not just loans to small businesses to start a small business, but actually to help them transition through the life of a small business towards commercial property ownership. If that's the goal of a small business, that will help to sustain that business in place. And so I think we tend to think about government in its more limited capacity, but I think we need to expand the roles and responsibilities of government towards a more robust understanding of their roles, both on the side of sort of thinking about the problem and the solutions.
And I think these 2 points are really important around information. I have to give a shout out to our Bronx crew. We have a WhatsApp that started during the pandemic. I want to shout out, I saw Carrie, I saw Wedco still managing. We can make some noise for them. A WhatsApp. Well, because we knew WhatsApp is really where our people at, WhatsApp, Signal, et cetera. And that WhatsApp was a place for information, so trying to get real-time information to folks with the best tool that we have now, and a tool that people actually are using, right, rather than adopting the behavior of a new tool and learning it, right, like meeting people where they're at. And then the second point is that we thought it was just to disseminate information. It also is troubleshooting and technical assistance, the small type of things that need to be done. People sending screenshots, people sending voice notes, right? That kind of being adaptive, flexible, and responsive of folks that are doing the kind of TA work is important. And the second thing, though, is that technology isn't always going to be a solution for some of these problems. Many of our small businesses, while there is, change in times, they're still using pen and paper, right? They're still using paper. They still have paper documents. They still are doing this, and that becomes a challenge, right? There's a back office actually component that can create a barrier to being able to access that capital. And so we saw folks that, they had their books, and they're trying to manage their books and still be able to access PPP, let alone one of my favorite small businesses, my barber. And how my barber, in the way that that business is set up, isn't quite eligible for PPP, right? So these are the kind of things that we want to just consider and lift up. I don't want to put you on the defensive, Ray. Is there any innovations that so you mentioned that great flexibility and that responsiveness to get capital out the door. Maybe this is an opportunity there. Are there any innovations that you want to lift up, or any innovations that you want to give this quiet audience a sneak peek on in terms of getting capital out the door?
Sure. So I must say that, I started my career working for a bank, and I was a vice president. I had an office on Madison Avenue and 43rd Street, and I thought I was it, right? Because I would go to work every day, nice suits, meetings all day, and I realized I really wasn't doing anything. I was going to work, but I wasn't helping the folks that I wanted to help. So a friend of mine, his name was Adolfo Carrion Jr., he ran for borough president. He said, I want you to be the president of the Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation. And I said, okay, but when I heard the salary, I was like, well, I'm gonna take a big salary cut. But I knew this is what I want to do. So every day I wake up today, I think I'm the luckiest guy. My job, I work for the government. I do. I'm proud of it. But I manage almost $1.7 billion in assets. So every day I wake up and find out how to give this money away. I'm being recorded probably, so my boss is going to hear, Ray, what are you talking about giving money away? What I mean by that is making access to capital just that. So you mentioned languages. There are 13 languages that every brochure we print out is set out in 13 different languages. Because as we all know, New York City is a melting pot. It's not just about Spanish or English. You have Mandarin, Korean, Bangladesh, Creole, the list goes on and on. Innovative ways to get people money. So what we're trying to do is tell folks, okay, you have paper. You're right. A lot of small businesses still have their little black notebooks. So what we tell them is, let's get to show you how to go about, digitizing your business. And how about we give you money to help you do that? So if you think about what we try to do, an innovative program we're integrating now is that we're giving out capital at 1%. Right, so you're a small business owner, and you come to us, we're gonna point you to a certified development financial institution that will lend you capital at 1%. So at some point, there has to be a realization that 1% is almost free money. right? Because we can't give you, everyone can't get a grant. So what we're trying to do is find a way to provide the technical assistance. I'm gonna keep harping on technical assistance all day long because that's what our folks need, right? We need to help them grow their businesses so that when their neighborhood changes, they change with the neighborhood. You cannot continue doing business the same way you've done for years and be successful in this day and age. So one of the things we're doing is doing everything digital, right? So we have courses to help people online spending. How do you sell your products online? We have a commerce online access program that we just started that allows people to learn how to sell your stuff online. The pandemic taught you anything. People are not going to stores as much, right? Amazon, there's a reason why Amazon is Amazon, because we are buying things from Amazon. So the idea for us now is to use the social platforms available to buy from our small businesses and our communities. So it's up to us as government to make sure that we make these platforms available to them. And not just make it available to them and say, okay, here's the platform, but this is how you use it. And then the challenge, and I'm probably speaking a little out of turn here and I'll stop right now. The challenge is getting people to understand you have to go to the classes, right? So if I'm telling you that every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday from 7 to 9 or 6 in the morning to 9 in the morning, whatever works for you, you have to come in. I'm paying people to come in to show you how to do this. So for us, it's imperative that we tell our small businesses, this is how you grow your business. I know it's hard, but to be successful, there's a lot of hard work involved. And so coming from the government point of view, it is, you're right, we could do things better. And I always tell folks that I work for New York State and bureaucracy is my middle name, right? And I think somewhere in my job description, it requires me to make people jump through hoops, right? So what I try to tell folks is, you're going to have to jump through a hoop. 1 hoop, 2 hoops, but we're going to limit it to hoops. But eventually, once you get through the jumping the hoops, you're going to grow your business, and we're going to make you successful. And I'll end with this. What I'm working on now, what I want to do now, what's most important to us is to narrow the wealth gap, right? Because we, as a community, have to start buying assets, buying a building, having bank accounts. It is growing assets and narrowing that wealth gap. Because what's the point of working all these years and then wind up with nothing? So our key component now is newsflash, and it'll come out, I guess, it's coming out now. So we are starting a narrowing the wealth gap program. You're going to hear about it. We're going to have grants to help individuals become banked, open bank accounts, learn how about bank accounts, how to get credit cards. Your credit score may be 400. We're going to get you a credit card. So I should stop now. I'll stop. My phone's dead. So.
Since he grew up here, he knew the train was about to pass by. But you know, one of the important points I actually heard around land and around real estate and vacancies, actually, it makes me think about vacancies. Many of us, if you grew up in the Bronx, you can remember any kind of vacancy, storefront vacant or abandoned, and then you turn around one day and you're like, whoa, where did it go? Or you turn around one day like, whoa, how did something get here? And that has an interesting history around disinvestment. It has an interesting history around outflows and depopulation, but we know that that's somewhat of a history of the past, right? Our Bronx is growing in terms of these things, but vacancies have now become another issue as we look at the displacement fears and the gentrification fears. And so a little bit of history, I'm gonna talk over this plane, so I hope you all can hear me. A little bit of the history of development is really important. And maybe, Willow, if we could take a lens back. How does the history of development in a particular city or neighborhood, how does that impact the nature of storefront vacancies? Easy question.
Yeah, right. How far back do we want to go? So I think it's important to understand, first of all, where gentrification happens is not just a random landscape of any old city. It happens in neighborhoods that are historically disinvested. And it's a rush of new capital, new people, new public investments, new shifts in public policy inside of those neighborhoods that have historically been disinvested because there's what's called a rent gap, where there's a huge gap between what somebody can make by reselling the property versus what it's currently valued at, or what residents currently pay, right? And that is the rent gap that developers, that cities, that landlords exploit, right? And that only happens because of our history in certain neighborhoods, right? Typically black and brown neighborhoods that have been denied capital, that have been commercially and residentially redlined, that have been subject to predatory practices in the past, like blackbusting, racial steering, racial covenants, the urban renewal, and what they used to call Negro removal, with the highways being rammed through black and brown neighborhoods. So this history really sets like the stage for sort of thinking about which neighborhoods gentrify today. It's not every neighborhood in New York. It is particular neighborhoods that have been historically disinvested, that have seen capital and white flight out of those neighborhoods, that have seen large businesses leave those neighborhoods, that have seen the middle class leave those neighborhoods, and have seen historic and intentional underinvestment in those neighborhoods that produce the opportunities for huge wealth to be made now through new investment in those places. So that's important to understand as a precursor to what we're currently seeing in terms of trends in gentrification, right? And you may see in some of these disinvested neighborhoods, as Michael's pointing out, a lot of vacancies, right? But you also may see, as the process of gentrification, and that's what I might call like the historically disinvested vacancy, right? Because it's decline in the neighborhood, it's disinvestment. It's hard for these businesses to actually operate given the sort of lack of economic stability in the neighborhood. However, there's another kind of vacancy that happens when gentrification comes to town, which is a kind of intentional vacancy around more speculative land use practices that are about trying to get the quote-unquote highest and best use, or the best investor, and maximize the property values in those neighborhoods. And so oftentimes you also see vacancy happening, and I think this is less talked about in gentrifying neighborhoods, because you see speculative investment, people trying to get the existing tenants out, whether it's residential or commercial, and trying to get new new tenants in. And oftentimes that purposeful vacancy is about property agglomerations, adding parcels together, being able to resell to a higher, to a developer that can take multiple small businesses or multiple parcels and sort of maximize the value on that. So I think we need to pay attention, and I'm happy to see that ANHD is paying attention to vacancies in gentrifying neighborhoods as one of the signals that there's a lot of speculative development happening and a lot of predatory practices of landlords that are trying to create vacancies in order to be able to get make a cash cow off of some of these properties. And also taking away the kind of fragmented land uses that you see in many neighborhoods that actually do protect small businesses, because when you have these little parcels that are owned by one individual owner after another, that makes it very hard to gentrify a neighborhood, because if that person owns their businesses, they can stay in their business. If it's vacant and it's owned by the same commercial property owner throughout the neighborhood, that is ripe for redevelopment.
Thank you, Willow. Ray, I wonder if you had a thought on this as someone who's been in the Bronx through a time of some of the highest vacancies and abandonment in the 70s and 80s. Maybe a little bit on the personal side. What was it like to see that and experience that, and what was it like to be a part of changing that and reversing that? Because you said you had friends, right. So you had powerful friends, I heard. So could you talk a little bit around that personal experience of what you saw, what it felt like, and then what was it like to be a part of the thinking to reverse and or ameliorate it?
Well, I mean, absolutely. But I just currently, if you go to 138th Street, right? Go to 138th Street, go to Lincoln Avenue, 3rd Avenue. What do you see? High rises, luxury high rises in my own neighborhood, and the folks in the Mott Haven projects, in Mitchell projects, they're still there. So I get a little worked up when I go by these high rises and say, "Wow, talk about gentrification! You guys are killing my neighborhood." Because there are no services being brought to the folks in the projects, right? They keep us in the projects, and then they build around us, but we're still in the projects. And no one's telling the folks in the projects, this is what you need to get to improve your life. I'm sorry on a tangent. I, at one point in my life, was not very popular in the South Bronx. Why? Because I helped develop Yankee Stadium and the Bronx Terminal Market, right? During that time period, for those of you who live in the Bronx and know the Bronx Terminal Market, before what's there now, was pretty much a dark and dreary place. All right, and so it was, I guess, I was like a piñata, right? Because every place I went, people say, you're displacing these small businesses. But when I found out those small businesses were working in the underground economy, right? So all the employees were being paid off the books, and I was like, that's not good. So what we try to do, and as far as displacement is concerned, our role in government is to find locations for these small businesses, locations that work for them, right? Because one thing to tell them, to have a landlord come in and go through the whole process of harassing these small businesses, because that's what they do. And I tell small businesses, you should make sure, go to a place, go to a not-for-profit, one of my favorites, think small, think small, end big, right? What they do is provide free legal services, right? So if you have folks who are being displaced, folks who have difficulty with their leases, go to them because you have rights. When I talk to a landlord and they tell me, we want to invest, I need a loan. I want to invest in my property. I say, sure, but are you providing spaces for community businesses? And are you providing spaces below market rent? Right? Because what's the point of me trying to get you in this building if you can't afford the rent? So I always tell the developer, you want my money, I know you want my money, I know you need my money, but if you want the money, this is what we want. So displacement to me just means that my role in government is to help these small businesses find a place to open their business or give them the capital they need to stay. Because a lot of times, no one wants to move, but they don't have the capital to stay, right? They don't have the capital, they don't have the wherewithal to fight back against the landlord who's harassing them. And the last thing the landlord wants to hear is that some guy from the governor's office is coming down here to talk about why you're kicking out this small business. And it's almost like, I'm sure all of us saw The Godfather 2, when the guy was trying to kick out that woman, and the Godfather said, no, you're not. He said, of course she can stay. And that's usually what happens. So government's role in displacement is to talk to the landlords that are doing the displacing. Have the conversation with the small businesses that are being displaced, and what does it take for us to help you to stay? And if it doesn't stay here, where can we put you? In a place that works for you. I'm not sure I answered the question, but I think that's what I tried, so.
We'll let you off the hook.
Thank you.
I think it's important too around the legal aspect. I'm glad that you raised this. Shout out to our legal service providers here doing that important TA and also doing that important education, right? That legal education. And it does remind me of organizing. And it reminds me of organizing in that organizing and small business owners have a similar thing that they need, right? And that need is to be lifelong learners. Organizers often, they don't know like legal precedents, they don't know tactics, but they have to learn. Small businesses often, they have to learn. And so the TA providers provide that kind of support and it allows that kind of growth, but there's still the burden of that learning, of that education, of that kind of being a lifelong sort of advocate for yourself, and ways that we can reduce that burden, because you also have to think about cash flow, accounts receivable, accounts payable, supply chain. We have to bring both of those things together, and some of those ANHD reports, right, or those videos like Power After Pandemics, you can find those online, or the report on storefronts, they help organizers, right? They give us the data and the analysis to fight even harder for the power and advocacy that our communities need. And this is kind of how we see supporting our merchants through an organizing strategy. We learn from the community organizers that do the power building. Organizing. So merchant organizing, and so BCDI and other organizations, we've been partnering with ANHD on this citywide merchant organizing piece. And you know, you heard me pontificate a little bit around some of those pieces, and even the way that we do learning, right? The kind of self-directed learning that has to happen alongside support when it's on call or on demand. A lot of us are doing that, and I want to kind of shift a little bit to organizing strategies and tactics. So Jennifer, maybe if I can invite you in on this question, just what are some organizing strategies and tactics that you are using to build merchant power?
So I'm not sure if everyone here is familiar with commercial district needs assessment. It's basically what the BIDs and other groups put on. It's a survey that goes to the communities, specifically small brick and mortar businesses, to identify what are the needs that are coming up, and to also just find solutions. So something that we recently did late last year was plug into that work. As street vendors, they're not usually included or even recognized as small businesses. And so I think one of the things that we're doing is trying to shift the narrative, in that businesses encompass a lot of groups, not just brick and mortars. The tia who sells from her home is a small business. The churro lady on the street is a small business. And all those people should be included in the survey that is surveying the community needs. And so that's something that we did recently, and I think the BID, I'm gonna continue going back to the BID because we're starting to develop a relationship with them, and it's necessary to plug into the work that's already happening, especially in areas where you are being excluded from. And so the BID wasn't always a friend of vendors, as they naturally aren't because they represent property owners, really. And so in this survey, I remember the ED of the BID was like, well, vendors are actually like displacing small businesses, the brick and mortars. And then something that we came to find out through this survey is that a lot of the issues that the brick and mortars were experiencing were the same issues that the vendors were experiencing. And so I think this opened up a new conversation into how do we work together to find solutions that work for all of us, not just one group. And so I think it's just about including the right people and ensuring that we are expanding our reach to beyond what we're accustomed to.
Thank you, Jennifer. Housekeeping, we're coming towards the end of our time, so if you all want to start thinking about your questions you might want to ask these panelists, now's the time to start thinking about that. We'll prompt us in a few minutes to pass the microphone around and take those questions, but just want to give people a heads up that the Q&A part is coming. Willow, I wonder if I can maybe tack onto that question and ask you a little bit of a harder one. Not that hard, right? You got all those titles, it's not that hard, but the question that I wanted to tackle is, what is the relationship? How could we start thinking about community organizing and wealth building? And community wealth building. I think Ray actually pointed this out, and Jennifer's comments stirred me on this. The community organizing often has been about fighting back, prevent the eviction, right? Prevent any number of things. But fight forward is also around power, and it's also around accumulation. And so the power to not just always fight back, because that's exhausting. We're always fighting back. We're fighting the next battle and the next battle and the next battle, but having the power to set development trends or planning or et cetera. What kind of is some of the relationships there that we should think about to do organizing for wealth building?
That's such a good question. And such an important one. I think part of what we need to think about is our strategy and what we're aiming for. And it's not just to stay in place, I think, in many neighborhoods. There's a goal, there's a reason why people started their businesses in the first place, right? And it's because they're trying to build opportunity for themselves and their families. They're trying to build economic mobility. And owning a small business is a part of that, but it's not necessarily the end of that. And so I think a lot of the models that I'm seeing that are working across the country in terms of cooperatives and community land trusts and really things that are having nonprofits that are owning commercial buildings and making them permanently affordable for small businesses are really using those organizing tools to say, we want something more for our businesses and our communities, and we want something to pass down across the generations, right? And so, yes, it's about organizing and strategy and getting people's voice heard and building power, but it's also about ultimately owning something and trying to figure out how we can collectively pool funds and pool investments and become investors in our own businesses. So there's a lot of folks that are thinking about new kinds of investment tools where small businesses just have to have a small little piece, $100 or so, and can become a shareholder in a larger commercial project. And that is an incredible tool to sort of thinking about taking some of these tools that have been perfected on Wall Street and putting it back in the hands of communities. And residents can also be shareholders in these buildings in their communities. So I think thinking really creatively, but towards the goal of community wealth, so that it's not just individual business doing well, but it's the whole community that's benefiting, I think is really where our mind should be in terms of a goal, but also where I think a lot of the tools and the power is currently being built.
Willow, thank you so much. What a powerful concept that we often talk about stakeholders, and then we often talk about residents, but taking those with the most stake, who often are residents, and they shares, full stop, right? That kind of community ownership. What are the strategies to get there in finance and et cetera? I think that was really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Ray, I wonder, you talked a lot about technical assistance providers and how much we need them. Do you have anything you want them to know, other than that you got their back? We heard that part. But anything you want to tell the technical assistance providers as we looking forward? Anything that they should know, anything that helps make this relationship between the things you do and them stronger and tighter? Is there anything that you want us to consider on the TA side?
Sure. I question, how many small business owners are here right now? Could you raise your hand, those of you that own a small business? Okay, so it is what we try to do is get more small business owners in events like this, right? Because technical assistance for us, for me, is providing funds for entrepreneurial assistance centers, for the small business development centers throughout the city, throughout the state. And those are the organizations that we tell folks, you have to build a relationship with them, right? Because we're paying these entrepreneurial assistance centers to do just what we need. Help you grow your business, right? Because it's all about growing your business. At the end of the day, as trite as this may sound, the reason you open a business is to make money. I don't know anyone who opens a business to lose money, right? So if the idea for us is to help you grow your business, become more profitable, then learn how to take that profit and build wealth, right? Because that's the start. You have a business, you're making money, and now you learn about investing. How do you put this money to work for you? How do you invest in a stock market? Maybe you buy an apartment. But there is a ways that we have to teach our small business owners to use their experience. Because if you think about it, to be an entrepreneur in New York City, it takes a lot of guts, right? To own a small business, you have to be smart. You have to be resourceful. You have to be ready to deal with the challenges. But too many times, our small businesses spend all their time dealing with challenges and not learning how to deal with the fruits of their labor. So technical assistance, and I know I've said that ad nauseum, is because technical assistance is the key. You mentioned the vendors. For us, to get vendors to come to entrepreneurial assistance centers has always been difficult. To get street vendors to understand how important it is for them to come to these classes, to learn about QuickBooks, because they also have to learn, you have to keep books. How do you open your bank account? How do we get them to Ponce Bank? I'm doing a commercial for Ponce Bank, who's one of the best banks in New York City, one of the best unknown banks in New York City, because they open accounts for small businesses that can't go to other banks to open accounts, right? So we want to make sure, I personally think that vendors are very important to the community, and that these street vendors, we have to take them and show them how to grow their business, because many of them want to transition from being a street vendor, and many of them, maybe not all of them, but many of them want to get brick and mortars. They want to open bank accounts. So the key, and this is it for me, right? It's technical assistance, folks. And for me, it is funding technical assistance services, because once you get technical assistance, then it's easy for me to give you a low-cost loan. That's what it comes down to. Technical assistance, capital, growth, and then stability in the communities.
Jennifer, I think I heard Ray say that him and his team want to spend a day in the life, or a
I
week
may
in the
have
life
to.
of organizers and go out
I
there
may
and do
have
the
to.
outreach
I'ma
and
give
do
him a
the
call. I may have to.
engagement and understand on the front lines why it's so hard to do these things. That's what I heard Ray say. He wants to be in our shoes for about a week or so. Just got to make sure they're comfortable ones.
Well,
But Jennifer, you want to respond before we close out?
Yeah. Just want to make a quick response. We got to legalize street vendors first, because a lot of the programs that you are offering is only offered to people with permits and licenses.
Right.
And unfortunately, the government has that at a cap, and has had it at a cap for over 30 years. So I think we have to start there,
Right.
and then start supporting them in the implementation.
I agree. I think it's silly for us, and this is mostly a city issue, not a state issue. Most of it is, well, why are you putting a cap on these licenses? I'm not understanding that we're in a difficult economy. These folks want to work, and we're telling them, well, yeah, I'm sorry, you can't get the license. So then when you sell without the license, they harass you. It's like, it doesn't make sense. And so I know someone from SBS is here, so I'm not picking on SBS. I love the commissioner. I do a lot of work with you guys, but we got to find a way to work together to kind of fix that issue. That is a big issue. I come across it quite often.
You are going to make people start hiding their name tags.
No, I didn't mean sorry.
So we're going to take questions. This is the last round of questions up here, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. A real simple one of looking forward and what's a thought that you want to leave folks with? And I think that thought are really around, again, centering in anti-displacement futures. So anti-displacement, anti-push-out, anti-gentrification. What's something you want to leave folks with? And I'll start. I want to leave folks. I want to give shout outs to the innovations that are happening. The Bronx Financial Credit, Financial Access Coalition, and the great things they're doing with banking and bringing banking to the people. I see my friends at the Business Outreach Center at Bach, and the innovations that they're doing in business management, which is a key thing we heard around surviving in this economy and growing. Those are some things to leave us forward with. Group purchasing, which is something we're thinking about at BCDI, both purchasing B2B. So how do we expand that? As we know, that's an important kind of lever, but also purchasing in terms of bulk, right? And bringing folks together to think about those supply chain efficiencies. Those are three things I want folks to talk to the people here who's doing that financial access work, who's doing that innovation and getting capital out, and business management, and of course legal services. I want you all to talk to them in the networking piece, and I want to leave it to our panelists, and maybe I'll go in order with Willow. One thing around anti-displacement that you want to leave folks with.
First, I think I would like to say that we need to center race and racial inequality and racial capitalism, even in this conversation, because I don't think we've done it enough on this panel, but there's vast disparities in terms of who is vulnerable and why they're vulnerable, who has access to capital, who can come out to a technical assistance program. And so when we're talking about this issue, we're not talking about it in generalities for small businesses. I think we need to be really specific about the businesses that historically have been underinvested, historically have been vulnerable, historically have not had access to capital and these kinds of grant and technical assistance programs. And then really how we help those businesses in particular make a great leap forward, but not just about business ownership, but really about wealth building and what are the tools that we have. And we do have a lot of innovations. We do have government playing a role, but more importantly, advocates on the ground and in communities that are creating new tools, advocating for new tools that are really helping to make a difference. So.
Yeah, we should clap. We should clap. You should clap. Ray.
I want to thank everyone here for allowing me a few minutes. I spent this entire week going to conferences, right? FDIC, CDFI is having conferences, and this is the best event I've been to all week, right? Right, Barika? And the reason I say that because there's a passion here. And so that's what we need. I think the old adage is strength in numbers. So we have numbers here. And for us, it is us. I'm part of this group. I grew up in this neighborhood. I grew up when the Bronx was burning. Wow, I just dated myself, didn't I? Yes. So yes, I grew up, when I went away to school, I told people from the Bronx, they looked at me like, oh God, let me hide my stuff. This guy's gonna rob me, right? So the idea for us is strength in numbers. I think the wealth gap is something we all have to deal with. How we help that? There's no doubt there's a racial gap in our country, but ultimately my last thing is this. This, without a doubt, has been the best event I've been to in quite some time. I need to get out here more. I need to really be more within groups like this so that the money that I have, you guys can tell me where to put it. And that's for me, sometimes I lose track of that. I lose track of where we should put the money. And I heard Bach's here. Is the folks from Bach here? So Bach is one of my favorite groups. You guys know Nancy Cameron, I was with her yesterday. I love Bach. They do a great job. And again, technical assistance, Bach. Access to capital, Bach. They're here in the Bronx, and they deserve a big shout out for the work they do. So, thank you.
Jennifer.
I just want to thank again ANHD for inviting us to participate in this panel. One of the things that vendors have struggled throughout the years is being recognized as small businesses. And so even participating here, representing vendors as small business is important in the conversation that we're having as a whole. And I think that just to add on to something that Willow was saying about taking land back, we all have to be working together to ensure that we as a community are thriving. And so it really means like all working together. And I think that that's what I'm gonna end with today. Just gotta make sure that we are sticking together because we're the ones that are gonna get ourselves out of this hole. Unfortunately, it's not always gonna be the government, it's gonna be us.
That's true.
Thank you, panelists. We have some time for questions from the audience. There's one microphone. Anyone with a question, could you please raise your hand? And
hi, thank you everybody for your insights. This is really great. My name is William O with Capital One. I actually used to work for SBS, so I've got some insights from there too. I actually just wanted to ask a question to Willow. You mentioned that the government can use the power of zoning for small businesses. Is there an example that you can share of a city or an area that has done that?
Sure. So there is I do use the example of maybe a San Francisco, their legacy business program. That's a well-known one where the city has provided legacy business zones in the city, where if you fall within an area and you qualify as a quote-unquote legacy business, that you're eligible for tax credits, you're eligible for using some of these historic preservation tax credits that are given to cities to be able to get subsidies to be able to stay in your building. So that's an example. There's ways in like formula business ordinances is what they're often called, where you're really trying to use your zoning ordinance to try to zone out the chain businesses. And there's many cities across the United States that have adopted formula business ordinances that are really trying to create the spaces that small businesses can go into and will be affordable to them. So if you're looking for structurally, you can use overlay zones to try to prioritize the kinds of businesses that you want, or you can use the zoning format in terms of like the actual box that businesses go in to try to structure a space that will be affordable and amenable to small businesses. So those are two of the ways that I would think about.
It's a long 10 seconds or whatever.
It's not the MTA, it's Amtrak. Tell them something.
I feel like it's got to be a really good question, so much anticipation. But Willow, earlier you mentioned that the best way to fight gentrification is to have small business owners own their space. And I agree with that, but at the same time, I guess I'll share an example, right? In this neighborhood, I know friends of mine, personal friends of mine, grew up in the hood with me, own small businesses, own their space, and they see these high rises going up, and they see dollar signs, right? So they want to increase the rent on the tenants in the other spaces. They're thinking about selling out to developers because this is their retirement plan. How do we counter that? How is it political education? What are other things so that we're not doing this to ourselves?
Yeah, well, one thing I will say is that not every small business owner wants to be a commercial property owner, and becoming a commercial property owner can, in some ways, for some small businesses, thwart their concentration on their businesses because you got to maintain the building. So it's not for everybody, but it is one of the tools that I think has been underutilized and we should be thinking about in the conversation about wealth building. And not every small business needs to own the business, in order to foster commercial property ownership and community ownership in particular, not every small business needs to be the owner of their own unit, as opposed to a nonprofit coming in and owning the whole building and making sure that it's available to small businesses, and particularly BIPOC and immigrant-owned small businesses, and particularly that they're rented at affordable spaces. How do you prevent somebody from selling out when they get a very high number from a developer? I don't really know the answer to that. I think there needs to be a sense about why these businesses are in the neighborhood before, and I think the more residents that stay in a neighborhood and the more these businesses see themselves being able to grow alongside this neighborhood, goes back to the first question about how are residential and commercial gentrification linked. If that small businesses leave, that the residents are more likely to leave. If the residents leave, the small business doesn't see a reason to stay. They don't see themselves growing in the neighborhood with all these new residents that don't look like they would shop in my business, right? So part of that ecosystem that we're trying to create is one in which that business can see themselves continuing to thrive and build wealth in place. And I think that's a hard metric to meet, but I think it's possible when you're sort of thinking about this in a holistic framework and building the tools holistically.
If I could take moderator hat off for half a second to add on to that. I think there is a political education piece that's really critical here. And one of the political education pieces is around, are people excited about these quote unquote new opportunities because of wealth building and because they want to be, you know, on some top 40 list of most billions or whatever? Or is it around affordability? Is it around the realities of like what cost may be or what is needed? Like, and I think why people are having that feeling around those opportunities is important in us thinking about the political education on that circulation of capital, the political education around B2B, right? Like just thinking about these supply chains and B2B and cost, which is a political question around policy. It becomes a policy and legislation question, and then it becomes a question of how do I begin to have those conversations with people to begin thinking about how do we stay in this neighborhood, or we'll be migratory and migratory and migratory and migratory. Like, when would that moving stop?
And also, how do we change hands responsibly of commercial properties? In the residential space, we oftentimes have laws around tenant opportunities to purchase, right? So if a residential property is changing hands, the tenants who are there have the first opportunity to purchase the property. We have nothing like that in the commercial space, where the person who's there might have an opportunity to purchase, or we might figure out how nonprofits could be given the opportunity to make that first bid on the property in order to maintain it as affordable. And so there's a creative opportunity to leverage some of the tools that we know are working in that residential space and think about how they might apply to commercial as well.
And that the legacy of racism is that so often people of African descent in this country have migrated, and it's not just for opportunity and horizons, but it's because of socioeconomic oppression and that racism. And where does that stop? Other questions? Sorry, heavy-handed. Back to moderating. Other questions?
Hi, I'm Deborah Martin from Van Allen Institute. Well, you spoke about the calculated degradation of a community that can happen with the goal of kind of neighborhood scale vacancy as a kind of pathway to gentrification. I'm wondering about the flip side. In a way, what you were just talking about is a kind of path to that. When there's investment in the public right-of-way, in open spaces, in parks, community gardens, even in like small business facades, that kind of thing, that like Ray talked about, investment in like small businesses need to change and evolve, right, to survive. So when that happens, that can attract outside capital for other reasons. And I'm wondering, what are strategies to have improvements that residents and local small businesses themselves want to happen, not be the pathway to displacement?
Yeah, so thank you. I also want to open this up to my other panelists to think about this question alongside me, but I think it's important to recognize that there's a difference between gentrification and neighborhood revitalization. Neighborhood revitalization is often driven by community needs, community voice, community agency to improve a neighborhood, but does not lead to this vast influx of capital, this vast influx of new residents, this vast influx of developers into a neighborhood. And there's a fine line between what is neighborhood revitalization and what is gentrification. It's kind of like, when you see it kind of thing. But I think that we should be investing in low-income communities, but we should be investing in ways that are meeting the needs of those residents. And what defines gentrification is a new set of priorities from the development standpoint, from the public policy standpoint, and from the residents who are moving in and have different wants and needs for that neighborhood. And it's not prioritizing established residents, it's not prioritizing established businesses. And so I think those are fundamentally different projects. And it's a fundamentally different lens to how you improve a community.
Any panelists want to go after that? Go ahead,
No,
Jennifer.
I think Willow summed it up really, really well in that it really, I do think that it does go back to organizing in a sense, because when gentrification happens, it's because the government has really decided on what's going to go on in a community and not necessarily the stakeholders or the residents of that community. And so I think when we're talking about how do we invest back into our communities, we need to make sure that the people who live there, the people who work there, the people who own businesses there are at the table coming up with these plans and not just listening in to what the government wants for that neighborhood. They should be the ones setting the priority for what they want in their neighborhood, because they know what their needs are the best. No one else does.
Got time for one or two more?
Hi, everybody. Okay, so last year, a huge part, for many organizations, of course, a huge part of our work was around technical assistance and really trying to help small businesses to stay in place, whether it be connecting them to legal services, pro bono lawyers, to help them, negotiate with their landlords, or helping them to apply for grants or for low-cost loans. Of course, many still can't afford to take on loans, and so grants were really the avenue that we looked to connect them with. So we were super excited last year with the New York State grant, the Small Business Recovery Grant, and we helped hundreds to apply. But unfortunately, very few who we helped were able to access that grant, and it's because when it came down to it, there were requirements, there were guidelines that I know definitely were different from PPP and some of those other things. There were lessons learned for sure, but certainly the work on the ground with small businesses, our work in coalition at ANHD with USB NYC just showed that across the city, there were business owners, the like of which we've been talking about today, who are more likely to be displaced, who were, I guess, poised to benefit the most from the New York State grant, who it ended up, so many of them, in our instance anyway, in our case here in the Bronx, weren't able to qualify. So we sent letters to the state, we organized as a coalition, long and short of it is, whether it be the profitability requirements or the loss requirements or the minimum revenues, I guess, what are some tools that we as organizations that are organizing in coalition, that are working on the ground with small businesses, like what are the ways in which we can, I don't know if it's more effectively have our voices be heard on behalf of the community with the state for some of those things that really are legislation or guidelines that just need to be changed. There weren't big things, there weren't huge things, but just wondering and asking for advice on how to effectively, have those changes happen on the ground, because that $800 million, I don't know, like we've asked, we don't know how much of it came to the Bronx. I have questions about this, and I'm sure others as well. And so essentially for us as a coalition and as organizations working in this space, would love advice on how to kind of like navigate this in the future, because I'm sure there's some politics and bureaucracy and other things that are in there, and any tools would be helpful so we can be more effective on the ground. And that question was, yes, primarily for you, Mr. Salaberrios, in case you were wondering.
No, it's fine, that's fair. Look, I would say that, so the legislation that was written for the grant program was written by our esteemed legislators. So my job was to implement what was written in the legislation. That being said, at some point you recognize that $720 million of grants went out to the most neediest of businesses, right? So I agree that a lot of businesses didn't qualify, right? But we did get over 54,000 small businesses, $720 million in grants, and 97% of those businesses are micro-owned businesses, because we target micro-owned businesses. I was shocked myself that why the Bronx didn't have as many applications as I would like, right? The Bronx trailed every borough except for Staten Island. So Staten Island was the lowest borough, then came followed by the Bronx. So for me, I would love to engage you on that, because I think technical assistance for me means organizations like yours who know the communities. A lot of times, the folks who apply for technical assistance in the Bronx are from Queens, from Brooklyn. They have great reputations, but we need to get more engaged with folks from the Bronx. Happy to have that conversation with you. We're about ready to let out another $8 million in grants, so you should be online. You should take my number. We should make sure that your organization, are you with WETCO? Oh, great. So we should have a conversation, because I do agree that we could do a better job, and I want to make sure I'm clear here. We could do a better job in the Bronx, but we could do a better job in Chautauqua County. We could do a better job in Niagara County. There are counties throughout the state that mirror our hometown of the Bronx. So the key is the issues that we have here in this borough, we're facing throughout the state. So I welcome to have a conversation. Definitely want to make sure we get more technical assistance providers. We're putting more money out there. And the grant program is still chugging along. We still have the 200 million seed program is going up also. So at the end of the day, we're going to wind up giving $960 million in grants. And I think that's something that we look at positively. And of course, there are folks that did not get a grant. And for that, we're going to try again in another round of grants. So did that answer your question? Yes. Good. Good.
One more question, last question.
Hi, thanks so much for your engagement. Keith Getter with NeighborWorks America. Our founding name is Neighborhood Reinvestment Corporation. So the comment about revitalization, you know, and how it then becomes gentrification is really such a cutting-edge question. I really appreciate the nuance. But I have some questions and some observations. I started my work
concise questions.
I'll be as concise as I can be. So the gist is, you know, special district zoning, and I'm observing that here we're in more of an industrial zone than a mixed-use zone. So as we use this frame for small business development, it doesn't necessarily lend itself to rising costs for residents that could lead to displacement. Now, I'm wondering about the role of special district zoning to support small businesses, distinct from having that happen in the main street, where maybe you then have rising costs that, you know, to my mind, gentrification is blind affluence asserting its own culture, and then costs rise all across the board, and the folks who live there can't live there anymore.
Can we get one answer to that and much more to talk about during networking? One answer?
Small businesses are industrial as well and manufacturing, and so those businesses are being displaced, and industrial zoning in many gentrifying neighborhoods is being replaced with residential zoning, and so those businesses, car manufacturing and others, are being displaced as well.
Thank you all. Can we get a round of applause? Thank you all, and thank you everyone, and we're going to turn it back to close out to Barika.
Thank you, Michael. All right, I'm going to be fast, and if Michelle, you can head on up, because it's a slow going to get up here, I will say. So I just want to quickly, there's like, I didn't plan this, they queued this up, but it's incredibly interesting to me that while this small business panel talked about land use and zoning, which was our first event, and talking about special purpose districts and the creation and depreciation of value through land use. We heard about residential, but specifically commercial redlining and the implications of that, which are our second event. Our third event was modern day redlining, right? So talking about remembering that redlining is more than where people could or couldn't live or where they could and couldn't buy. It's also the businesses that they could create and what investments they could access for them. We heard about the wealth gap and wealth building, stability and opportunity. It took me back to the CLT bus tour where we saw a building that went from 400,000 to 1.2 million in the course of 7 months. Was it 7 months? Something like that. I'm forgetting the timeline, but those numbers are about right. And the people impacted, right? And I think folks said a reminder that like businesses are a lot bigger than we think. Industrial businesses, folks who are running a daycare out of your house, the DJ, the photographer, right? It's not just the bricks and mortar along your commercial corridor that are small businesses. So I'm going back to the capital, the people, capital, and policy, which is part of, very much connects to like how ANHD thinks about and puts together these conferences. The people are our members and our community groups that are doing the work on the ground. The capital are the financial institutions and folks who want to be in the room and in the conversation, to think about doing things differently, to think about how to get resources and investment to communities in the way communities need it and want it. And policy, which is government, and government, and sometimes us pushing government, a reminder of organizing being the driving force of pushing government to change, but that there's an intentionality of who our ANHD network is and who we bring together to have and be a part of these conversations. So I'm going to have Michelle come up. We're going to close out because no need to be between people and food and drinks. But I want to invite Michelle Thornhill, who is the Director of U.S. Community Relations in Cities, Community, and Investing and Development group, to the stage for a few final remarks. But quickly, before I have her do that, I just want to say thanks to Michelle, to the city team, to Barlow, to Larissa, to Janet. When ANHD said, like, hey, we want to do our conference like this, they didn't have to say yes. They didn't have to agree to, like, try this experiment with us, and they did. And not only did they do that, but City very much had conversations with us to help us think this through, and we're very much a partner in figuring out how we could be successful in doing this. And it's incredibly meaningful for us as a community-based organization to have City trust us with this, considering that, especially given this topic, we are here because of their original investment. City was the original investors in what we call EQED, ANHD's Equitable Economic Development work. Their investment allowed us to go from focusing mainly on housing and bank reinvestment work to small business work. So it is because of their work and their partnership, but not just their resources, but their collaboration, that we're here today. So thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. And I recognize that I have the hard job of standing between you, the empanadas, more libations, and a DJ. So I will definitely be brief. I just want to say to Barika, to you and your team, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for thinking outside of the box. Let's give them a round of applause. I have to agree with the previous panelist who said, I think it's Ray, I've been at a lot of conferences and convenings this week in the city, and definitely to be in the Bronx, in community, to be at a small business brewery, to hear and have a performance from a small business is definitely well worth it. And glad to be outside of a hotel, outside of rooms, and in community, even if it's a little chilly for me because I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, but I'm managing that. But ANHD has been a long-term partner of City. And so when Barlow and team came and said, hey, Barika and them have this amazing opportunity, can we support it? It was absolutely yes. And so I know that a lot goes into the planning, and it's, 4 convenings. You may think that equals 1, but no, a lot more work. But definitely the conversation here today and what I hear from the other 3 convenings hopefully continues to challenge us, that there's more work to do. There's a lot of progress that we've made. But how do we continue to bring innovative solutions forward? How do we continue to come together and collaborate with one another? That has been a theme that we heard today, but I think also through a number of the convenings. And what's most exciting for me leaving this convening, this is my first one, is as I've traveled around the country talking to our community partners, the power of coming together, the power of collaborating, and the power of community voice as we think about our work. And so for our team at City, this is not just a sponsorship. It is really about how we listen and hear and allow the conversations, the work that you do, the needs that are still unmet, how we allow that to inform our work as we go forward. So thank you for this opportunity to be a part of this series, and hopefully we will continue to network and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Michelle. So I just want to I want to have them stick up their hands, and then we're just going to give one last set of people a big round of applause, because one thing that is very different and unique for us as ANHD is that we put a lot of work as a team into curating the content of this. So I want to do a special thank you to, I'm going to go by space, Ijama, Lucy, Block, Lucy Leiden, Anais, Crystal, who's brand new, Emily, Gina, Chris Walters, Chris Casey, I can't find you. There we go, Chris Casey, Rita Maza, Belanda is back there, Gabriel, Jamie, Karen, Sarah, did I miss anybody? And last but not least, the person who asked, oh, sorry, Jennifer, back there, I missed Jennifer. But last but not least, the person who really makes sure we get this all done and moves it all the way through, through all of the stages, our Director of Operations, Lauren Nye. So, thank you everybody for coming. I look forward to continuing all of these, oh, I missed Will Depot, all of these conversations as we go forward. I want to thank this panel. I want to thank all of the panels. I want to thank everybody who's attended these, and we look forward to continuing to fight forward and build community power with all of you all.